Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
On Sundays, I lead a Torah service with the children in the Learning Center, including a Torah reading. They don't like to be called up individually for an aliyah, so I call them up as a group. And each week I try to think of something. Come up for this aliyah if you like vanilla more than chocolate or cats more than dogs. And this past Sunday, we had just finished the holiday of Passover, and I said, come up for this aliyah if Passover is your favorite holiday. And none of them got up. So I quickly realized my mistake and said, come up for this aliyah if your favorite holiday is Hanukkah. And all but two of them got up. One of them, her favorite holiday is Purim, and the other one said, I don't have a favorite Jewish holiday. It is difficult to be an outlier. In this case, it wasn't too painful. Most of the community can accept a person who prefers hamantaschen to latkes, right? But what about when what sets us apart is something more controversial, more significant, and more personal? This week's Torah portion has a verse that is painful and difficult because it's been used to exclude LGBTQ+ members from our community. Leviticus 18:22 says, do not lie with a male as one lies with a woman. It is an abhorrence. So how do we deal with it? One approach would be to exclude it from our text, to decide we won't read this verse. And in fact, it is the reading on Yom Kippur afternoon, and guess what? We have turned it into an alternative reading because I feel that once every 3 years is enough to read this verse. But I also feel like we can't just pretend that it's not part of our sacred canon. We are God wrestlers. That means we have to look at this verse in a way that works for us. Another way you can handle this verse is to read it narrowly. This verse prohibits a particular intimate act between two men. Doesn't say anything else about other expressions of gender or sexuality, just one thing. But the narrow reading of this verse is problematic too because, I'm no expert, but if I was a gay man, I would find this verse problematic still. And the rabbinic sources, as you go forward in the halachic codes in history, prohibit other acts that are considered not part of mainstream sexuality or gender identity. So we still need to deal with how this verse is used. The three movements have three different approaches to this verse. The Orthodox movement says, love the sinner, hate the sin. If someone is not acting on their gender identity or sexual identity in a way that conflicts with Torah, then the community should welcome them and love them. This approach prioritizes commitment to Jewish observance over sexual and gender identity. The Reform approach says the Bible is not authoritative, and therefore this verse can be ignored. This approach prioritizes our personal needs, including our sexual and gender identity, over sacred text and tradition. The conservative movement has a different approach, which is to find a way for Jews to both express themselves fully and live an observant life. It accomplishes this by how it interprets the law. And one way that rabbis handle difficult pieces of text is to look at conflicting halachic priorities and prioritize them. The classic example we're given in rabbinical school is, Rabbi, someone comes and knocks on your door and they have a chicken and it's clear that maybe it wasn't shechted 100% properly. Rabbi, if the person standing at your door is too poor to buy another chicken, you reassure them, you say, go home, enjoy a good dinner with your family. If the person is wealthy enough to buy another chicken, you say, you're right, it doesn't look like it was quite a proper slaughter, please go buy another one. There are two halachic values competing in this scenario: the dignity of a poor person to eat a meal and kashrut. I'll give you an example that happened to me in my career as a rabbi. I was working with a congregant of Chinese descent. She was anticipating celebrating her first Lunar New Year after her conversion, and she felt conflicted about eating certain foods lovingly prepared by her elders that contained pork and shellfish. So we talked about what to do. We talked about the value of shalom bayit, peace in the home. We talked about kibud av ve'em, honoring one's mother and father, and we also talked about kashrut, and I left it up to her to decide in this complex scenario which Jewish path she would take, which halakha she would prioritize in this scenario. In the case of Leviticus 18:22, there are also competing values. There's the prohibition against a particular intimate act between men, but there's also kvod habriyut, honoring all creation as sacred. The conservative movement ruled that honoring all creation as sacred supersedes the prohibition of this intimate act. Conservative Judaism says a person who identifies as LGBTQ+ is beautiful and part of God's creation and must be honored for who they are, and they don't have to give up either their commitment to Jewish tradition or their LGBTQ+ identity. What I love the most about this conservative interpretation is it's non-binary, which is very fitting when you're dealing with the queer community. Because the queer community always has valued fluidity and flexibility. It doesn't have rigid categories. And living a Jewish life that honors God and yet allows us to live fully, it doesn't have to be yes, no, black, white, good, or bad. What it's about is examining our values and then prioritizing and integrating them. Listen to this excerpt from a Devar Torah by Lainey Solomon, who's the associate Rosh Yeshiva at Sfara, which is a queer Beit Midrash. Lainey is writing about halachic time. There is no morning in halachic time, and there is no night in halachic time. She writes, or they write, I'm not sure. Halakha is a window into the complex gradients of the world and our experiences. For every binary thought in our tradition, there are countless instances of liminality and expression which push us to think beyond binaries. In halakha, there is no morning. There is alot hashachar, the rising of the sun, which is the point at which sunlight peaks on the horizon. There is Neitz HaChama, which is the peaking of the heat. That's the moment when the top of the sun can be seen. And there's Mishiakir, from when we are able to recognize a friend, specifically not our closest friend, at a distance of a few feet. These distinctions are incredible and precious. To collapse them into the binary of day and night misses the juiciness and the beauty of the spaces in between and the specificity that they each carry. The beauty of that moment with the Learning Center children was that no one teased them, no one questioned them, no one pressured them. They just accepted that we had a child in the room who preferred groggers to dreidels. Please God, may we see the day when that is how we respond to the LGBTQ+ community.